Breaking the silence, Karoline Levitt stand. In the heart of Washington, D.C., the briefing room buzzed with restless energy. Reporters filled every available seat, cameras trained on the long podium, and the air itself seemed to vibrate with anticipation. At the center of it all stood Karoline Leavitt, the poised and unflappable press secretary known for her quiet conviction and steadfast commitment to authenticity. Dressed in a smart, understated suit, Karoline exuded calm confidence, a stark contrast to the aggressive questions that were about to be hurled her way. The briefing began like many others, with Karoline delivering a series of carefully rehearsed statements on the administration's latest policies. Her voice was even and deliberate, each word measured to convey transparency and control. For a few minutes, the atmosphere remained civil and orderly as she fielded standard inquiries from various reporters about economic measures and community programs. However, one reporter, a sharp and persistent liberal journalist named Michael, soon began to challenge her repeatedly. At first, Michael's questions were straightforward. "Karoline, given your strong words on unity and progress, why do you believe that our policies are enough to bring about real change?" he asked, his tone professional yet laced with skepticism. Karoline answered smoothly, reiterating that the administration's actions, community outreach, educational investments, and support for underprivileged neighborhoods spoke for themselves. Her responses were confident, echoing a deep-rooted belief that actions, not mere symbols or sound bites, define genuine commitment. But Michael wasn't satisfied. As the minutes ticked by, he circled back with variations of the same question, each time pressing a little harder. "Really, Karoline, don't you think that by avoiding the discussion of specific, controversial impacts, you're dodging accountability? Can you assure us that these policies aren't, in some ways, neglecting the very people they claim to help?" His voice, now edged with irritation, cut through the room's steady murmur of discussion. Karoline's face remained calm, her eyes fixed steadily on Michael, as if daring him to break her composure. "I have addressed that point," she replied, her tone firm yet measured. "Our policies are designed to benefit all Americans. I believe in focusing on tangible outcomes, on the lives changed by our efforts, rather than engaging in repetitive rhetoric." Yet Michael pressed on, repeating his question with increasing insistence. Each time he asked, the room grew a bit more tense, and the atmosphere shifted from one of routine inquiry to a high-stakes showdown. The repeated challenge began to wear on Karoline. With every iteration of the same probing query, the underlying message was clear. Michael was not interested in dialogue, but in forcing a confrontation, in drawing out a reaction that he could later dissect for headlines. As the minutes stretched on, the murmurs among the reporters grew louder. Some scribbled notes furiously, while others exchanged uneasy glances, sensing that this press conference was rapidly spiraling beyond the usual protocol. At one point, as Michael's tone turned mocking, "It seems you're avoiding a simple yes or no. Are these policies suppressing marginalized groups, or are you simply playing it safe?" Karoline's composed mask began to show the tiniest flicker of strain. For a long moment, the room fell into a heavy silence as all eyes focused on her. With a steadying breath, she leaned forward and said, "I have answered your question repeatedly. If you have a new, relevant question about today's discussion, I will address it. Otherwise, I'm not here to engage in repetitive arguments." Her words, delivered with quiet finality, resonated through the room. But Michael, undeterred and clearly intent on making his point, pressed even further. "So, Karoline, is your silence simply a tactic to avoid accountability? Do you not fear that by not speaking directly on this issue, you're allowing a dangerous ambiguity to persist?" At that moment, the atmosphere reached a boiling point. Karoline's eyes, once as steady as ever, narrowed imperceptibly. She glanced briefly toward a nearby security officer, a silent signal that she was no longer willing to let the personal attack continue. "I'm not here to play games," she said, her voice low but resolute. "This briefing is about policy and accountability, not about indulging in repetitive theatrics. I have provided clear answers on our initiatives, and I will not be drawn into a cycle of redundant questioning. A murmur of approval rippled through some corners of the room, but Michael only smirked and leaned in further, his pen poised for another jab. But isn't it the duty of a public servant to offer clarity, even if that means shedding a few superficial symbols? How do you justify a lack of public demonstration of your faith and values? The tension in the room was now almost palpable. Every reporter, every camera seemed to hold its breath. Caroline's gaze swept across the room, catching the eyes of her colleagues, and even a few sympathetic looks from veteran journalists. With a calm that belied the internal storm, she responded, "My actions, the work we do behind the scenes, and the outcomes we achieve are the true markers of our commitment. I do not need to display a cross or any token for the sake of optics. True conviction is measured by the impact we have on people's lives, something I hope will speak louder than any repeated question." Her voice was unwavering now, each word laced with the weight of her experience and the quiet power of authenticity. For a long moment, Michael's forceful approach faltered, and the room's atmosphere shifted. What had begun as an aggressive interrogation now felt like a turning point. Yet Michael, sensing a chance to reclaim control, attempted one final provocation. "Are you saying, then, that if you don't answer my repeated question, it's because you're above it? That you think your track record excuses you from the need to engage?" Caroline's eyes hardened slightly, and she took a deep breath before replying. "I am not above accountability, Michael. I am here to provide transparent and thoughtful responses. However, I will not be drawn into a loop designed solely for provocation. I stand by my answers because I believe in the substance of our work. If that is insufficient for your narrative, then perhaps you're missing the point of what true accountability looks like." At that, the room fell silent, a heavy, expectant silence that seemed to mark the climax of the confrontation. Security, now subtly on alert, signaled that they were ready to intervene if necessary. The cameras captured every nuance, the determined set of Caroline's jaw, the slight tightening of Michael's posture, and the shifting expressions of the other reporters. Finally, with a measured gesture, Karoline lowered her gaze and spoke once more, her tone final and unyielding. "If there are no further relevant questions, I will now move on." Her statement was met by a brief, charged pause followed by a flurry of activity. The reporter, visibly frustrated and with a smirk that faltered for just a moment, muttered a final remark under her breath before reluctantly stepping back. The tension in the room gradually dissipated as other journalists tentatively resumed their questions on different topics. Yet, the impact of the confrontation lingered long after the cameras had stopped rolling. In the aftermath, as the press conference wound down, social media exploded with clips of the exchange. Headlines debated whether Karoline had been too harsh or appropriately assertive. Political commentators dissected her measured refusal to engage in repetitive theatrics, and news outlets praised her for upholding a standard of genuine accountability. Meanwhile, within the quiet corridors backstage, Karoline took a moment for herself, a brief pause to collect her thoughts amid the cacophony of digital outrage and praise alike. Later that day, as her phone buzzed incessantly with messages and notifications, she reflected on the incident. For Karoline, the experience was not about winning an argument or controlling the narrative. It was about remaining true to her values in the face of relentless pressure. She knew that in today's media landscape, the battle over truth and accountability was never-ending. But she also believed that authentic action would always outlast manufactured controversy. In the days that followed, while the viral clip of her steadfast response continued to spark debate, Karoline returned to her work with quiet determination. Her focus shifted once more to community outreach and the practical steps being taken to improve the lives of those most affected by policy decisions. Michael, on his part, was forced to reassess his approach, his usual arsenal of pointed questions tempered by the realization that not every confrontation was meant to generate spectacle. Ultimately, the incident served as a potent reminder that true leadership is not about grand gestures or ostentatious displays of faith. It is about the quiet, consistent commitment to doing what is right, even when no one is watching. Karoline's stand that day became a beacon for those who believe that integrity and accountability must come from within, rather than being manufactured for public consumption. And so, as the echoes of that tense press conference gradually faded into the background of an ever-changing media landscape, one undeniable truth remained. Authenticity is measured by the courage to live one's beliefs, unshaken by the noise of repeated challenges. In a world that often values spectacle over substance, Karoline Leavitt's unwavering stand reminded everyone that sometimes the most powerful answers are found not in loud proclamations, but in quiet conviction.